John was in a bigger hurry than ever today. He had a very important deal ahead of him. The meeting was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. My God, who needs to meet so early? Who even came up with this idea? John had always disliked early mornings and could never understand why classes started at 8 a.m. and you had to be there even earlier, at 7:30. And considering he lived quite far from school and had to travel through a forest strip, which they proudly called the park, then take a bus almost across the whole city, little John was always late. And he constantly received remarks from his teachers. "Late again, John," she would say sarcastically, smiling and making an equally sarcastic note in his diary. "Have you tried getting up earlier? Maybe then you wouldn't be late?" "I get up early enough, can't get up any earlier," mumbled John, sitting down and rubbing his behind, which would surely get him a scolding from his father that evening. Why don't they all understand this? He thought to himself. The teacher never even considered that it wasn't about when he got up, but rather how much he had to do before school. And the bus driver, who crawled through the city like a turtle, could have stepped on the gas a bit more. Of course, he had nowhere to rush, but John, what could he do? He could only sit, pressed against the bus window, and be late. Always late. Probably, since childhood, John just couldn't stand being late. But it was some kind of cruel fate. As soon as an important meeting or negotiation came up, time seemed to speed up on purpose and flew by unnoticed. And here it was again, a delay. It had been a long time since the eternally dissatisfied father or the sarcastic teacher. And the bus driver had probably retired by now. The forest strip was cut down, the private houses demolished, and a huge residential complex was built in its place. John had long been a wealthy businessman, living in his own mansion, with a personal driver, and yet he still continued to be late. He just couldn't understand why you had to work so early. Just like at school, miserable half-asleep kids sat at their desks at 8 a.m. The younger grades went home by 1 p.m., the older ones by 3, and after that, the school was empty. The sound of buckets and mops from the janitors echoed through the classrooms, and voices bounced off the walls. John never understood why you couldn't just sleep until 10, get ready, and come to school by 11. Everyone would be well-rested, cheerful, and ready to learn. He was sure the teachers would be much calmer and more kind too. They could teach until about 4 p.m. and then go home. What a beauty! Who needed to schedule a deal for 8:30? Will the price go up or something? John didn't understand. His pants zipper got stuck. His tie was impossible to tie properly. It was all nonsense. It felt like something otherworldly was deliberately delaying him so that he wouldn't go, and the deal would fall through. When John stepped out of the house, he noticed that the driver had wisely pulled the car out of the gates, knowing that the boss was delayed, and decided not to waste time opening them. Well done. These were the kinds of employees John liked and respected, those who didn't need constant instructions and orders, who understood the situation and could make sensible, adequate, and most importantly, the right decisions on their own. As he approached the car, John caught a glimpse of a gypsy woman by the gates. I hope she doesn't sneak inside, John thought, or it will be trouble later. He hurriedly opened the car door and was about to sit down when, somehow, she appeared right next to him and tugged at the edge of his jacket. In a hurry? The gypsy asked. Well, kind of, John replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. Don't hurry to your own funeral, the gypsy said. John froze at her words. The gypsy had already turned and was walking away, but suddenly she looked back and shouted, And keep an eye on your wife. John literally flopped into the car seat, stunned. What should he do now? Shall we go, John? The driver asked. I guess, John replied uncertainly. Then close the door, please, the driver suggested. Let's follow that gypsy, John said in a strained voice. They drove a couple of meters to the corner, turned, but there was no one there. They drove another few blocks, but the gypsy seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was obvious she couldn't just disappear like that. Now to the office? The driver asked. No, John replied. After a moment of thought, he added, home. He took out his mobile phone, called, and canceled the meeting, rescheduling it for another day. He felt uneasy. For the past few days, he'd been feeling either unwell or had a headache. Maybe I've caught a cold. Or maybe something else. A thought about seeing a doctor crossed his mind, but John didn't like doctors. He simply wasn't used to taking care of his health. His father was the same, always working, rain or snow, no matter the weather. At night, he would cough hoarsely, and his mother would push him to see a doctor, but he would brush her off. Oh, come on, it's just a cough. Everyone coughs. And then that healthy guy died of tuberculosis. In our time. The doctors just shook their heads and said, "Where were you earlier? We could have cured him." His father, bewildered, blinked like a little child, not understanding what was happening. He had just been coughing. John lay down on the sofa in the living room. What a lousy day. From the very morning, it had been clear that he should cancel the meeting, not go anywhere, not bother the driver, not disturb anyone in the office. Well, what's done is done. John couldn't stop thinking about the gypsy. She was strange. Someone else would have sent her on her way and gone on with their business, but he wasn't someone else. For some reason, he believed her. Maybe it was because many years ago, almost exactly the same way, a gypsy had foretold his mother's near death. They had been traveling south, he and his mother, to rest. The station was packed with people, their train was delayed, and then they announced boarding from a far platform, and there were only 2 minutes to get there. They had to run to the train through the underpass, and people rushed, some to the underpass, others across the tracks. Suddenly, someone grabbed his mother's hand. "What do you want?" She turned sharply, thinking it was John, who was dragging behind, carrying a heavy suitcase. He was 15 at the time. "You're doing the right thing, taking your son south," said the gypsy, looking directly at his mother. "Well, it's the right thing, I suppose," she snapped. "What's it to you? I'm not giving you any money. I don't need your money." "I don't take money from the dead," the gypsy replied and seemed to vanish into the crowd. His mother didn't pay attention to her words. But that year, she indeed died of a stroke. At that moment, John couldn't help but recall the image of that same gypsy and her words. Whether it was a coincidence or not, he didn't know, but ever since, he preferred to avoid any gypsies and fortune-tellers. And if he heard something from them, he took their words seriously. And now, how could that gypsy have appeared out of nowhere, and how could she have known what lay ahead for him? Why did she say that about death? And about his wife? John felt uneasy, but it was already done. He had canceled the meeting, postponed the deal. Now, he was no longer late and could allow himself to relax and rest a bit. After all, the headaches had really been bothering him lately, probably from stress. The image of the gypsy wouldn't leave John's mind. There was a sense that something had gone wrong with Gwen. They had been married for 5 years. Back then, after the wedding, Gwen would follow John everywhere, to all the receptions, meetings, cocktail parties, and even to the sauna. The men would joke, "You've really got her wrapped around your finger. She doesn't let you out of her sight for a second, keeps you in a vice grip." And John actually liked it. He couldn't get enough of Gwen and thought that was how it should be. After all, as they say, in a successful couple, one loves, and the other allows themselves to be loved. But John believed that he and Gwen were different, that they were the rare kind of people who both loved each other. At least, that's how he always thought. But everything changed when he gave Gwen a dream for her birthday, a small clothing store. It was a very interesting shop. It was located on the main street, right in the city center. A great spot, high foot traffic, good purchasing managers. And Gwen herself had impeccable taste and knew fashion as well as any expert. Now, John hardly saw her at home. Gwen was completely absorbed in running her store. He had already begun to hate the day he decided to fulfill her long-time dream. And they're right when they say, be careful what you wish for. John hadn't understood the true meaning of that phrase before, but now he fully realized it. He wished his wife had just kept following him around, begging for the store. The new routine introduced some kind of discord into their seemingly happy family. 2 more years passed quietly, and only now, lying on the sofa, did John suddenly realize it. Why, after 5 years of marriage, did they still have no children? The words of that gypsy seemed to bring him down to earth. And indeed, what has Gwen been so busy with at work all this time? Maybe he should look into it? While John lay on the sofa, pondering the futility of life and where their family hustle had led them, the person who had planted all these thoughts continued to sit in the bushes around the corner of his house. John and the driver had passed this spot twice without even suspecting that, right under their noses, was the very same gypsy they had been trying to find. Sarah was trembling with fear, like an aspen leaf. Her terror pulsed in her head. What had she done? Although Sarah was a born gypsy, she had never practiced fortune-telling, and certainly never made a living from it. She hadn't lived in a camp for a long time. She was an outcast. She had been rejected for having a child without a husband. It just happened, she fell in love with a guy, but the happiness didn't last long. Her brothers dealt with her lover in such a way that he didn't survive his time in intensive care. When Sarah had her daughter, she was cast out as an outcast. She scraped by however she could, living wherever she could, often without food. When her daughter, little Catherine, turned 3, it turned out that the girl was seriously ill. Doctors found some congenital or hereditary condition. Sarah didn't understand medical terms, but she understood one thing: her daughter was gravely ill, and now she had to find work to provide her with the proper care and treatment. With her last bit of money, Sarah decided to buy herself decent clothes, something like a business suit, to go to an interview and try her luck in getting a job. Without an education, of course, she wouldn't be hired for a high position, but she didn't need a career. She just wanted to make a good first impression so that at least someone would listen to her. In the fashion store, one suit on the mannequin immediately caught her eye. She imagined how she would look in it at a job interview, neat and reliable. Even if she were applying for a janitor or delivery job, Sarah still didn't know where she would end up working. She'd like to work in an office, but it was unlikely they would hire her even as a secretary, despite the fact that she could make an excellent cup of coffee. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't have any other skills. On ordinary days, Sarah had no education or profession, nothing except a burning desire to save her child and find a good job. So, she had to look stunning. The young woman confidently walked into the fashion store and approached the salesperson. From there, everything went according to the classic scenario. Sarah was greeted, scolded, called a pauper, and shown the door. She didn't give up, though, and promised to complain to the boutique owner. Imagine, today, you were unbelievably lucky, the owner of the store was right there. Well, did all your enthusiasm fade away? Go ahead, start complaining, or are you too scared? Sarah realized she had run into a rude woman in beautiful clothes with a perfect appearance. This woman was rotten to the core. She didn't even bother to ask if Sarah had money. And Sarah did have money, even if it was the last of it. But she had it. It was just unbearably hurtful, just painful, and that was it. She felt like crying. No, worse, she felt like picking up a rock and smashing that store window. But Sarah thought about her daughter, who was in the hospital, about her health, which she couldn't risk. So, she pulled herself together and simply left the store. The salesperson, who had called herself the owner, came out onto the street and yelled something unpleasant and insulting after Sarah, but Sarah didn't look back. After all, why should she care what some complete stranger thought of her? Even if she was the owner of the store 3 times over. Everything that woman thought about Sarah was just her personal opinion. She thought and said those things not because Sarah was like that, but because that's how she herself was. Let it all come back to her. Sarah wandered around the city, looking at the windows of other stores. Soon, she came across a small, makeshift market and, to her surprise, found exactly the same suit as the one in the store from which she had been kicked out. Sarah couldn't exactly judge if the material quality was the same, but the color and style were identical. Wasn't that the main thing? And the price, it was 3 times lower. So, as they say, every cloud has a silver lining. She managed to buy what she wanted and even save money. Now she could visit her daughter in the hospital with some treats and start preparing for interviews. For a few days, Sarah didn't get any invitations, but she didn't despair. A waitress? Why not? After all, you don't need a degree in mathematics or perfect spelling for such a job. Memorize the order, serve the dish, set the table, and then clear it. Anyone can do that. And the salary was decent. There were also wealthy clients who leave tips. Sarah went to the interview. She did her hair, put on that very suit, and set off. As she entered the cafe, Sarah suddenly froze, that voice. The very same voice that had scolded her in the store. Oh my God, Sarah thought, is this woman following me? Is she now the owner of this cafe too? The young woman decided to sit at a nearby table and figure everything out. If the woman was just a customer, Sarah would wait for her and her companion to leave, and then continue with the interview. But if this was really the owner of the cafe, Sarah would simply leave and continue her job search elsewhere. She wasn't worried about being recognized. Sarah had completely changed her image. Plus, she was wearing the very same suit that the pauper gypsy, as they had called her in the boutique, hadn't been sold. So no, the owner wouldn't recognize her. Besides, the woman was too busy with her companion. It was obvious they weren't just colleagues or friends. You didn't need to be a psychologist to understand that they had a rather close relationship. They were laughing, but Sarah felt uncomfortable with their conversation. It wasn't just that her ears were burning, her blood ran cold. Sarah didn't understand everything they were saying, but she grasped the main points. In broad terms, she understood that these two were lovers, not husband and wife, not fiancé and fiancée, but lovers, plotting a crime. Moreover, it was already in progress. The woman had a husband, and they were planning to get rid of him in order to seize his entire fortune. The woman was poisoning her husband with some pills that were absolutely not to be given to men, something from the range of contraceptive drugs. These pills, intended for women, could cause serious health issues in men, even leading to a stroke. The idea was that the husband would become disoriented and sign the documents that her lover would present to him. He was, after all, the husband's competitor and wanted to take over one of his factories. The plan was for the man to sign a gift deed instead of the purchase and sale agreement. After that, the wife would continue her dirty work, and when the husband died, she would inherit everything, and she and her lover could marry. At least, that's what Sarah understood. What a vile woman, Sarah thought. She had a burning desire to stand up and slap her across the face right then and there, but she held herself back. She knew that would definitely ruin her chances of getting the job, and she might even be arrested for hooliganism. Plus, it wouldn't help her achieve anything in the situation. Sarah needed to quickly find out who her husband was. It seemed like he was a wealthy man, judging by the fact that these two were planning to divide up his assets. Then an idea occurred to Sarah. What if she actually saved this rich man? Maybe he would help her pay for her daughter's treatment in gratitude. Yes, her intentions were selfish. But, Sarah thought, who wouldn't do this when they have a sick child? After all, her little girl was literally fading away. The only thing that could save her daughter was a single injection. Just one injection, but the medicine cost so much that Sarah couldn't even imagine the price. Soon, the couple was getting ready to leave, and Sarah faced a choice: wait for the manager and talk about the job, or follow the woman to find out where she lived and where her husband was, so she could warn him of the impending danger. Probably, her selfish thoughts outweighed everything in this situation. Sarah chose the second option. The lovers took a taxi, and Sarah took another, following them. The lover got out of the house, and the woman continued on her way. Sarah kept following her. Thankfully, it wasn't far, or she would have worried about not being able to pay the taxi driver. The woman got out in front of a huge mansion, surrounded by a high fence and gates. There was no security at the gates, but it was immediately clear that very wealthy people lived there. Sarah returned home. Although, calling the small semi-basement room where she and her daughter had lived for over a year a home was difficult. At least they didn't have to pay for it. Essentially, it was a former stroller or ventilation room that the house's residents had agreed to let Sarah use in exchange for collecting garbage from the yard. An old couch, a wobbly stool, that was all the furnishing in their home. In the past, Sarah had been happy to have some roof over her head and walls to protect her from the wind, even if there was only a small ventilation window in the ceiling. But now, seeing how other people lived, she no longer wanted to return there, let alone bring her daughter back after the hospital. Now, she needed to figure out what to do with that woman's husband. The man had to be saved. How could she tell him about everything? Just approach him and say that his wife planned to kill him and marry her lover? Who would believe that? It would only scare off the potential criminals. No, she had to act with cunning, plant a seed of doubt in the man's mind, and push him to think that the doubt came to him on his own. But how to do that? Of course, divination. After all, many people believe in fortune-telling and horoscopes, otherwise, they wouldn't be so popular. Sarah didn't even consider that there were people who didn't believe in that. And if they said they didn't believe, they still had their doubts. Otherwise, her mother, aunt, and grandmother, and most of her fellow countrywomen would have been out of work long ago. The thing was, Sarah had never mastered the art of divination. She had been prepared for something else, for marriage, and she had let the whole family down. She had dared to fall in love. And with whom? She had fallen in love with a gajo. How audacious! Well, fine, she had fallen in love. She had a child out of wedlock. She had brought shame upon the whole family, and no matter how much they loved Sarah and forgave her for everything, they were obliged to expel her from the community. Otherwise, no one would have proposed to her sisters or married their daughters to her brothers. These were the customs, the laws. Sarah didn't blame them or hold any grudges. Who knew if she would have done differently in their place? Sarah simply tried not to think about it. In short, Sarah didn't know how to tell fortunes, nor did she intend to. She planned to tell the man the truth as it was, just presented under a certain guise. Then, it would be up to him to figure out what to do with it and whether to take any action. She quickly headed to the gates of that rich house. The main thing was to avoid running into that woman. But everything seemed to be going smoothly. Since early morning, Sarah had been watching the gates. The wife had left early in her own car, and it seemed she was alone. After waiting a little longer, Sarah saw the gates open again, and another car drove out. Just as she was about to rush in with her prediction, the car stopped, and the driver got out to wipe the windshield. Sarah guessed it was probably the chauffeur. Her intuition didn't fail her. Soon, the man himself appeared. He hurriedly approached the car. Sarah froze in shock. The man's face was painfully familiar to her. She even wanted to run away, but then she remembered that she was, in fact, saving his life as well as her daughter's. She'd sort out her own feelings later. Sarah realized that she couldn't wait any longer. Either the man would leave, or she would never go through with it. As her grandmother used to say, if you're afraid to do something, just get up, do it, and the problem will be solved. This was the principle Sarah had followed when she ran away with Catherine's father. She thought her grandmother was hinting at running away for love. But as it turned out later, her grandmother had meant marriage. They had just misunderstood each other. The girl understood that the man had noticed her presence, and she sprang into action. It was now or never. She rushed over, grabbed his jacket, and blurted out the phrase she had prepared in advance, "Don't rush to your own funeral." The man turned around, and Sarah was finally certain. Face to face with him, she knew she hadn't been mistaken. The man was the wife's husband, but he didn't resemble Catherine, Sarah's lover, much. He was definitely older. Was this a coincidence? A ghost from the past? A punishment from fate? Sarah, like a gypsy, didn't believe in coincidences. She was scared and decided to retreat quickly. It was only when she reached the corner that she remembered she also wanted to warn him about his wife's lover. She turned around and yelled at the man in shock, urging him to watch his wife. Then Sarah turned the corner and realized she had nowhere to run. What if this man wanted to chase her down and ask for details? Oh, God, she hadn't thought about that. What a fool she was. Now, what should she do? Along the fence, there were thickly planted boxwood bushes, serving as decor and a living hedge. Without thinking, Sarah dove into them, crouched down, and froze. Almost immediately, the man's car passed by. That meant she was right, the street was a dead end, and he didn't need to go there. They were looking for her. Soon, the car drove back. Sarah heard the gate's opening mechanism clank, and she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she had saved the man. It was clear that he had returned home and wasn't going anywhere. She could feel her hands trembling and her knees shaking from the stress. But how would she face him now to get her thanks? Well, it seemed like there was no way to do that now. What was done, Sarah decided. This was her fate. She would earn the money for her daughter's medicine herself. She just needed to find a good job. She decided to stay hidden a bit longer to calm down completely before going on with her business. John was lying on the couch in the living room, still amazed by himself. How easily he had canceled that meeting. Apparently, he didn't really want to be there in the first place. Everything had been against him since the morning. Yesterday, he had fought with his wife all evening. Today she left early in the morning, and he overslept. In fact, everything had gone wrong. His intuition had not let him down, but what about his prediction? It was interesting, though. How did she know about it? It was a pity he couldn't find her. Where could she have disappeared to? The street where the gypsy had vanished was really a dead end, but she couldn't have just run off to someone else's house. The gates and doors were locked. What if she simply slipped into the bushes and was sitting there? John often did that himself when playing hide and seek with his younger brother. Clark wasn't very good at counting to 100. He would get confused, skipping numbers. After 40, he would start over with 8. Or maybe it was just a little rascal cheating in this way. Time to choose a new hiding spot was running out. And when there was literally nowhere else to hide, John would simply dive into the nearest bushes. He would crouch there, right under his brother's nose, unseen. Later, it turned out that this was the best way to hide. In fact, people almost always miss what is right under their noses. John thought about his childhood and his younger brother, Clark. 3 years ago, or maybe a little more, he was gone. His heart broke with pain and frustration. Some unknown scoundrels attacked him and left him in the middle of the road at night. They never found them. And the guy had just been about to get married, saying his fiancée was pregnant, and was looking for the right moment to bring his family together and introduce them to his chosen one. But life had other plans. Perhaps, somewhere in the world, his son or daughter, nephew or niece, was running around. John didn't have children of his own, so at least it would have been nice to see a nephew, to talk with him. That would have been fun. If only he looked like Clark, at least someone would remain of his brother on this earth. It was a pity, though, that they would never meet. He didn't even know the girl's name, so finding her seemed impossible. Thinking about his brother's girlfriend, John suddenly remembered the morning guest. What if she really had hidden in the bushes? He put on his clothes and went out of the house. Walking to the gate, he took a few steps down the street and stopped. What was he doing? This was madness, as if he had slipped back into childhood. So much time had passed, the gypsy had long since left. Sarah felt her legs go numb from crouching. It was time to get out of the hiding place. She cautiously parted the bushes, looked around, and stepped onto the road, brushing off the dry grass. She walked toward the bus stop, turning the corner of the fence. Sarah came face to face with the very person she had warned about the danger. They stood and stared at each other, just inches apart, and remained silent. Sarah wanted to run, but her legs gave way, and she fainted from the tension. A few days passed since that moment. Sarah worked as John's secretary. They had agreed on this as a cover. Sarah made her signature coffee and carried a folder of papers around for him, creating a businesslike appearance. John's wife, Gwen, was rarely home and paid no attention to Sarah. Most likely, she had long since forgotten about the gypsy she had yelled at in her store. John claimed to be feeling unwell. Yes, he really wasn't feeling well. He apologized for the failed deal and rescheduled the detective. And he really did keep an eye on Gwen. Sarah told him everything, word for word. She was a living witness to what had happened. The detective earned his fee with flying colors. He provided John with photographs of his wife with her lover, and John's shock was immense when he saw the man in the pictures, the same buyer of the factory. And that could only mean one thing: Sarah was right. Gwen had gotten involved with Alex, and they were up to no good. There were also many photos showing his wife purchasing very suspicious medications at the pharmacy. John was upset, but he never managed to repair his relationship with his wife. From that moment on, he tried not to eat or drink anything his wife had touched. But just in case, he continued to say he felt unwell and out of sorts, even though he actually started feeling much better. Throughout this whole situation, Sarah was his only witness. John kept a close eye on her, protecting her like the apple of his eye. Sarah couldn't understand why he looked so much like her deceased fiancé. She pushed these thoughts away, but couldn't find a reasonable explanation. Why did these two men look so similar? Now she didn't flinch when she saw the familiar face next to her. The next day, John scheduled the negotiations and deal himself. From the very morning, he pretended that he couldn't open his eyes because of a headache. However, postponing the deal for a third time would have been improper. They set off, the three of them, John, his wife Gwen, and Sarah as the secretary. Gwen suspected nothing, and from her upbeat mood and happy appearance, it was clear that she was determined to see things through to the end. She was confident everything was going according to plan, and in just a few minutes, John would sign the sale agreement and the deed of gift to Alex. In the evening, she would give John a horse-sized dose of the prepared drugs. And if everything went as planned, by morning, she would be a widow. A wealthy widow. During the negotiations, John suddenly stopped, grabbed his head with both hands, crouched down, and suggested that his secretary take over for him. Essentially, he entrusted Sarah with the task. She stood up, took the photographs from the folder the detective had provided, and began telling the assembled shareholders what Gwen and her lover had planned. The security immediately detained Gwen, and in her pocket, they found the very pills that were meant to make her a happy widow. The scam failed, everything was exposed thanks to Sarah. And, of course, thanks to a little bit of luck as well. If she hadn't wanted to stop by that boutique, none of this would have happened. The newspapers would have written about the sudden death of the famous businessman from a stroke. And soon, they would have covered Gwen's lavish wedding. They arrested her lover, Alex. At first, he managed to avoid the investigation. Naturally, for a price, and he was listed as a witness. But it didn't take long for him to be caught bribing officials and thrown into prison as well. Justice had been served. Now there was no need for her to stay with John, especially since her secretarial duties only included making coffee. And in general, John didn't need a secretary. However, he always found an excuse not to let Sarah go. Before bringing up her sick daughter, she decided it was time to clarify once and for all who was who. John was stunned when Sarah revealed she had known about Clark since the time of his brother's death. John had never told anyone that he had a brother. The loss was simply too heavy, and the wound in his soul too deep. How did this girl know about Alex? If she had learned about his wife and the impending assassination purely by chance, then what secret connected this gypsy with his brother? Perhaps, after listening to her, John will be able to uncover the mystery of Clark's death, he thought. What do you know about him? John asked, looking intently at Sarah. I know that I loved him very much, and I have a daughter from him, Catherine, the girl confessed. John grabbed his head. So that's how it was. This was the coincidence that even gypsies had to believe in. This was why Clark had chosen the right moment. His girlfriend, his future wife, was from the gypsy camp. John understood that it wasn't simple to pull a girl out of the environment she was used to. Where is she? Where is my niece? I want to meet her. John's face lit up with happiness. Sarah hesitated to tell him the second half of the truth, that her brothers had made sure that Alex wouldn't exist anymore. The story of the girl's illness was enough. John was ready to run to the hospital right then and there and pay for any expenses, even if it took $1 million or $1 billion. Whatever it took, because that little girl was a part of his brother, the only thing left of him. He was sure he had to help. Sarah didn't stop John's noble impulse. Wasn't this the moment she had been working so hard for? But why did she feel so disgusted, so miserable in her soul? Why did she suddenly want to howl like a trapped wolf, or bury herself, or just cry, burying her face in a pillow? Sarah felt this way because, over time, she had fallen in love with John, truly and seemingly forever. She couldn't imagine her life without him. But she had to keep her feelings to herself. After all, he was Alex's brother, a blood relative of her daughter. She couldn't allow herself to even think about John, yet she couldn't force herself not to. As they say, the heart wants what it wants. Sarah was ready to leave everything behind, take her daughter, and run to the ends of the earth, wherever her eyes could see, but first, she needed to heal her. She couldn't risk Catherine's health. The fact that the girl couldn't tell John the whole truth weighed heavily on her. She felt that John was drawn to her too, and that he loved her immeasurably. After Catherine was discharged from the hospital, John took them to his house for rehabilitation. He paid for everything, including what was needed. Sarah barely managed to control her feelings. She knew that if John found out that it was her brothers who were responsible for Alex's death and realized that she was indirectly guilty, her romantic mood would end, and he would hate both her and Catherine. Sarah felt like she was caught between a rock and a hard place, and eventually she couldn't hold out any longer. Once her daughter felt better, they left John's house. Sarah could no longer carry the burden of this secret. She wrote John a letter. Though it was filled with mistakes and almost looked like it had been typed, the point of the letter wasn't in its appearance. She confessed that it was her brothers who were to blame for Clark's death, that she had loved him, and he would always remain in her heart. Because she refused to get rid of his child, she had become an outcast among her own people. And now she loved him, John, and she didn't know what to do with this. Sarah returned to the very same semi-basement room she had so dreaded returning to. The only thing that warmed her soul was the joy that her daughter was now healthy. Catherine could once again, like many other children, run, play, laugh, and enjoy life. Sarah tried not to think about the past anymore, not about Clark, nor about his brother. Several weeks passed. "Mom, why is Dad standing outside and not coming in?" Catherine asked, returning from a walk one day. "Catherine, you're confused. We talked about this. Your dad died, and you've never seen him." "No, it's another dad, the one who treated me." With shaking legs, Sarah went outside. Opposite her little room stood John, looking at her intently. "So this is where my niece and my beloved woman live," he said. "Are you sure about the woman part?" Sarah asked. "Well, I think you were the first to write about your feelings. But I've written a lot of things too. We both lost our loved ones. I lost my brother, and you, practically your husband. I think we both have an equal right to happiness. Hooray! Mom and Dad are going to get married." Little Catherine cried out, running into the yard.